Nate Lerner's thinking about it, too. He's co-founder of draftbeto.org. It's a website promoting O'Rourke's presidential run, and he is kind enough to join us tonight. Unlike so many people on the Democratic side, you have come, and I really appreciate that. So let me just ask a very straightforward question. When Beto O'Rourke says that we need to rethink some of the principles upon which the country was founded, would that include the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, the Second Amendment? What does that mean? Right.
So on the surface and taken out of context, that certainly sounds bad. But what he's actually talking about is a very common approach to constitutional law. Constitutional scholars for centuries have debated if the Constitution should be taken literally and at word, or if it's a living, breathing document that we should interpret as things change. And guess what? Our country has changed and the world has changed quite a bit in the last 200 plus years. And what Beto is saying is that perhaps we need to revisit parts of the Constitution as a result. That's a very common discussion that scholars have.
Look, and I'm open-minded. And by the way, there are things in the Constitution, you know, I think we should always have conversations about everything that we disagree with. But what specifically is he talking about? I think it's also fair to ask, what principles need to be revised?
You know, I'm not a spokesperson for Beto or for his campaign, but, you know, I do understand what he's saying as far as needing to revisit parts of the Constitution. I think the Electoral College is a really good example where you are empowering some voters more so than others and giving them more of a voice than others. And that's really unfair and not what our democracy is about. That's a very good example
what does that mean? Look, obviously, we're for fairness. There's a lot of unfairness. I agree with that, for sure. And we should work as hard as we can to rectify it. But just give me one example of the principles that might be changed under a Beto O'Rourke presidency.
I do not speak for Beto or for his campaign, so I can't do that.
Okay, totally fair enough. So he was asked about the border wall, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close, we are killing people when we build border walls. What is that? How are we killing people? How have we killed people by doing that?
So in the context of what he was talking about, he was making 2 points. One, when we militarize our border with Mexico, you're increasing the risk that people are going to get hurt or killed when they cross the border in their encounters with our security forces on their side. And also, when you build a massive wall during the at the points of entry, where people are most likely to legally cross the border, they will seek out other points, and those points tend to be more dangerous. And so, if you force people to find different and new ways to come into the country, a lot of those tend to be more dangerous, and you're increasing the likelihood of killing people. So he's saying we need to find a more civil and humane way of treating those who come into our country. And, you know, that doesn't mean no border security. He's not for open borders. Democrats aren't for that, despite what's often said here. No, they're not. They're for treating people like humans and treating them in this humane way.
But Mexico had over 31,000 murders last year. That's about twice the number we had, in the country has a population less than half of ours. So it's one of the most dangerous countries in the world. And so it's fair to be concerned about that violence moving north. Any normal country would be
But it's also fair to understand that people might want to be fleeing that violence to have, you know, for their family's sake and to build up lives here.
That's true. But I mean, the rights and the interests of Americans come first from the perspective of the U.S. government. That's why we have 100%, government to protect.
Absolutely.
So explain to me, and you can speak slowly if you want, how we are forcing people to come across our border illegally. How are we forcing people to come across? I don't understand that.
We're not forcing people. It's just that we should be treating them in a humane and civil way because they are humans. And despite the way they have been described by Donald Trump and Republicans, you know, they're not criminals. They're not rapists. They're not all drug dealers. Many of them are just coming here to seek better lives, and we need to respect and appreciate that.
I totally, but I've never doubted that. And some are bad people. Most are just economic migrants who want to move to a richer country.
Exactly.
I get it. I would, as I said many times on the show, I would leave Honduras too, and I would come here illegally if I could. And I mean it. I'm not joking. So I get it. But I'm not from Honduras. I'm from America, and I don't want people driving down wages in this country. So don't we have a right to say, no, you can't come in unless we want you to come in?
We absolutely have a right to do that. However, as Americans, we also have a duty to treat them a certain way and to respect their humanity and respect them as individuals and not simply cast them aside. And so when you're looking at border security, there is a certain way that you should be treating people, and it's not forcing them to, you know, it's not putting them at a massive risk and potentially killing them.
But how are we putting? But if we erect a wall and say you can't cross, that's the same as killing them?
Putting up a wall does put them in greater danger because it forces them to find different points of entry. And a wall is just a massive, it doesn't accomplish anything. it doesn't solve the main problem integration, which is longer visa, with people overstaying their visas.
So I'm
glad
you put that.
Tunnels
that's
that
totally fair. That's a talking point, but it's also real. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yes.
And in fact, Mr. Rourke was asked it too by Jeff Bezos' newspaper, and his quote was, "I don't know." Now, how could he not know? He represents Texas. He's been asked of immigration for years, and he hasn't thought through visa overstays, which, as you point out, are a driver of our crisis. How could you not have an answer to that?
So again, out of context, that sounds bad. But what he said after that was that he would work with the people who it's affected by, work with policymakers, work with experts, work with people on the ground who deal with this every day to find a solution. And actually, I think it's very refreshing that a politician was willing to say, "I don't know," because if you look at where immigration reform has gone the last 20 years, which is nowhere, I think a lot of politicians actually don't know. They have no idea what a solution is because we haven't found one. And so what he's saying is we need to have a debate. We need to talk it over.
Well, look, I'm totally for that. And I actually do
so it sounds
agree
like
with
you support him there.
I support being honest about not knowing. I just think you should try a little harder. But let me ask you something that I don't know the answer to, and I'm not being mean, I'm being sincere. Here you had in the last election an Irish Catholic guy with a Hispanic nickname running against an actual Hispanic guy with an Anglo name. Would that seem a little weird to you? A little audacious? Maybe?
You know, Ted Cruz tried to make that point as well, and Texans got over it pretty quickly. It's not a real point. The point is moot. You know, it's something to joke about for a minute. It's his nickname. It's his nickname growing up. I guess people call it Ted. You know, Ted Cruz. Ted is Iron Knife as well. And it's not something people care about. People care about real issues.
Yeah, no. Well, I asked about real issues, and I ended it with, as you pointed out, joking about it for a second, which I didn't. I appreciate your coming on, Nate. Thank you very much.
Of course, anytime.